I will make a start. People will be coming in and joining us, I'm sure. But just to say, welcome everybody. My name is Lauren Curtis and I'm an inclusion advisor in the staff inclusion team here at the University of Bristol. Today's event has been organised by the staff inclusion team and also the student inclusion team with help from the public events team here at the university. I will ask my colleague in a minute, Rob, to introduce himself. So just to say, really, this is obviously an event for staff, students and for the public. It's part of our Black History Month series of events this month. And it's actually our second In Conversation With event that we've run. The first we held in April 2021, where we had Lord Paul Boateng, who came and spoke to us. And really kind of the aim of the events is to hear from speakers who are either linked to the University of Bristol or to higher education. And we invite them in to come and talk to us about their personal and their professional journeys. For those staff here, it's similar to TheirStories, which is a staff event that we run for staff and PGRs. So just to let you know today, we'll have approximately 30 minutes where I will be asking Jason some questions, and I'll ask Jason to introduce himself in a minute. And we have some pre-submitted questions that some of you have given us beforehand. So we'll then come to audience questions, and you can also enter any questions that you have in the Q&A facility at the bottom. Just to let you know, you can be on, obviously, everybody here will be on mute because it's a webinar. You can switch on the live transcript to have closed captions if you wish, and that's the live transcript button at the bottom with the CC, and you can just hit that and you can put subtitles on. If you have anything you want to let me or Jason or Nikki or Rob know, you can use the chat facility to let us know anything. And we will be and are recording this event today. So what I will do now is I'll introduce Nikki. So thank you, Nikki, for being here. Nikki's our BSL interpreter and is a member of Interpreters of Colour Network. So she's helped us with our event before. Welcome, Nikki. And I will also now just hand over to you, Rob, just to say a little bit about the student inclusion team.
Thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Salso, and I'm really pleased to be working with the staff inclusion team to put this second In Conversation series with Dr. Jason Arday. My role in the university, I'm the student inclusion officer, and I support our undergraduate Black, Asian, minority ethnic students, and which runs a program called the Be More Empowered for Success program. So I'll be in the background supporting Lauren for this event today.
Thanks, Robbie. So as I said, that's kind of the introduction part over with. We're very excited to be joined today by Dr. Jason Arday, who's going to, as I said, reflect on his personal and his professional journey so far. Jason, I've worked with quite a bit, probably in the last 3 years. He's been a guest speaker and a facilitator at a range of different University of Bristol training and events, including our Disrupting Racism programme and our conference, which we ran a couple of years ago, as well as a range of other activity across the university. So Jason is an associate professor in sociology at Durham University in the Department of Sociology and the Deputy Executive Dean for People and Culture in the Faculty of Social Science and Health. He holds a visiting professorship at Coventry University, London Metropolitan University and Nelson Mandela University, and is a trustee of the Runnymede Trust, the UK's leading race equality think tank, and also the British Sociological Association. Jason sits on the Centre for Labour and Social Studies class and the National Advisory Panel and the NHS Race and Health Observatory, can't say that word, academic reference group, and is also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. He's an author as well, so just adding to all of the things he's done. So he's author of Exploring Cool Britannia and Multi-Ethnic Britain, Uncorking the Champagne Supernova. He's a co-editor of highly acclaimed Dismantling Race in Higher Education, Racism, Whiteness and Decolonising the Academy with Professor Heidi Mirza from Goldsmiths. And his latest edition collection with Dave Thomas is entitled Doing Diversity for Success in Higher Education, Redressing Structure Inequalities in the Academy, and that was released in June this year. So that just gives you kind of a you know, some of the things that Jason's been involved in. And I guess with no further ado, I will hand over to Jason to introduce himself. So welcome and thanks for being here, Jason.
Oh, thank you so much, Lauren. Like, it's honestly, it's been the biggest buzz over the last 3 years to work with you. You're definitely one of the best people I know in academia for sure. And Nikki, thank you so much for everything you're doing as well. You're brilliant. I can never get over people who can do things that just seem so difficult and they make it look so easy. And I just think what you're doing is amazing, Nikki. So I really appreciate that and being here today. So thank you. So both you and Lauren, thank you, and everyone, Emlyn, Robbie, and Chris, all helping out as well. Most importantly, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I hope you're all well, and I hope you've all had a good day. My name's Jason, and yeah, basically for about 10 years, I've been living the dream. So I'm not sure when I'll wake up from it, but I've been really fortunate to meet a lot of great people and to be inspired by a lot of great people. And yeah, I guess it would just be good to chew the fat with Lauren today and just kind of get to how maybe that all happened. But yeah, I think, you know, the most important thing is weird because a lot of the things that I do, you kind of prepare for, or you can, you know, you do it because you're working from research or stuff. But weirdly, like, I'm quite nervous about this because it's different, and I guess you get to be authentic in a really stripped back, unplugged way. So I probably won't speak as well as maybe I normally do, but I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's definitely. Yeah, no, because we've heard your lectures and they're amazing, but this is about getting to know you and kind of how you got to where you are and all of those stories. So yeah, that's brilliant. So thank you. So shall I kick off with our first question, which you kind of touched on actually just a minute ago, which was who or what inspired you to follow the career you had? And that can be anyone, like friends, relatives, educators, mentors, anyone at all.
That's a really good question. I guess the thing that inadvertently inspired me was when I was 21. When I was at university, my lecturer just got their PhD, and I asked them, like, what's a PhD? Like, what does it mean? And they were like, I'm a doctor. It means I'm a doctor. And I said, oh, like, can anyone do one? They're like, well, not anyone. And you definitely can't, because, you know, you'll never be in a position to do one. And I didn't take a barge or offense to it. I just felt, yeah, they're probably right. Maybe I can't, but let's see how things end up. Let's try and pursue it. And, you know, I was very fortunate to have a mother who was kind of like, whatever you do, just try and do the best you can at it. And I think in the end, the thing that inspired me was the idea of the impossible. So an illiterate adult or an autistic adult who was illiterate, who didn't speak until he was 11 and didn't learn to read and write until he was 18. It's like, how cool would it be to turn that all on its head? You know, I trained as a PE teacher. I was a PE teacher, but I thought, like, how cool would it be to, you know, go completely across disciplines, having not done any sociology qualifications, and basically train myself how to be a sociologist and try and take on the world and see if I could win. And thank God that's kind of how it, I guess it's kind of how it turned out. But it only really turned out like that because I was very fortunate to meet some amazing people over the last like 10 years who kind of give you the opportunity, you know, believe in you and yeah, make you a lot better than what you actually are. People like yourself, like lots of people. So I think that's the kind of short version, really.
Yeah, and can I just ask about the PE teacher to academic, because that's quite a different jump. Like, how did that? What made you jump from teaching PE into academia, or was there not one thing?
Yeah, no, I always say, like, and I say it now, like, you know, being a PE teacher was the best job I ever had because I really affected people's lives in a big way, and I would teach a lot of people that were like me. They were, you know, from quite poor backgrounds, you know, working class, council estates, you know, black and white working class as well, and they could see a lot of themselves in me, and I could see a lot of myself in them, and kind of seeing that day in, day out was a really good thing that prepared me to go into academia. And also, I think the transition came really because like, and this varies differently in different types of people, but like I had this unwavering self-belief that I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I felt like I could do well. And I felt I could do well because fundamentally I had the right principles, like I had the right morals, and I felt like above anything else, like I think I was a nice person, and I think that's really underrated in being successful. I think, and the reason why I emphasize a nice person thing is because like a lot of people do a lot of selfish and underhand things to be successful in life, and I just, and even though you get those opportunities, I knew that wasn't the way for me. And you know, funnily enough, I wasn't actually supported when I was teaching PE in physical education, sorry, in higher education. But all the places I worked, without naming names, none of them really supported me to take this other path. You know, if anything, they punished me for it, for not producing sport-related research. And but I can be probably annoyingly stubborn about things that matter, but I can be really stubborn and quite difficult. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it. And so basically I made up the hours at night. I just, you know, I'd get home, I'd you know, look after the kids, and I'd work from like 10 when everyone had gone to bed, from 10 to 7 a.m. in the morning.
Wow.
Doing race related research. And then I go back, and in the day, 9 o'clock, I'm teaching PE again. And I had to build up my portfolio that way because I wasn't given any time. I wasn't supported by anybody at work to do it. And also people just thought it was the most ridiculous idea, the idea that you could go from being a PE teacher and a PE practitioner to then being like a sociologist of education. But yeah, I really my belief in that regard was unwavering, but it was only strengthened because of the people around me.
Yeah, wow. And that kind of leads on to my next question, which is, like, are there some key moments or events that have shaped your career and life choices? Like, it doesn't have to be one, but are there some, like, when you're asked that question, there's some things that stick out for you that you think, yeah, those were key?
Yeah, there's probably 4 or 5 things. I mean, one of the biggest things, if not the biggest, was when I was 18, my mum took me and my brothers to a homeless shelter on Christmas Day. And my brothers were there for a couple of hours, and I stayed there for probably 18 hours, maybe. And when I left there, when I was there, I met a guy who was a professor. And long story short, he'd lost his family in a road accident, and he was the sole survivor. And basically became destitute and turned to drink. And he said to me, when people look at me, they just presume that I made a series of bad choices, but I lost my family. And I had a breakdown, and I became disconnected with reality. And he said to me, like, never look at a person and just presume they're in this position because they made bad choices. And that one conversation changed my life in quite a big way. And then I met my tutor at college at the time, Sandro, and I couldn't read or write. I could just about spell my name. And he basically was like, you know, he said, listen, are you willing to work hard? He said, yeah. I said, yeah. He said, I think we can get you to university in 2 years. And I was like,
Wow.
How? And he was like, well, you have to believe it. You can't just say it, you have to believe it. I was like, okay, well, and I started laughing. And those 2 things happened probably about 2 or 3 weeks from each other. So into the new year. And yeah, basically, you know, the reason why that going to a home school was so important is because I was kind of in my head, I was like, I'm going to dedicate my entire life towards helping people. So I wanted to try and raise £1 million before I turned 40. And then the second part of that was you know, meeting Sandro, and he just basically made me believe that we could take on the world and win. And I feel like that's what we did. We both took on the world. We were both 2 chancers and kindred spirits, and we took on the world and we won.
Amazing. Wow. Those are, yeah, that thing about them being a couple of weeks apart is, yeah, strange for them, those events to be, so close together. We've actually got a comment about the marathon that's just come in as well, but I won't come to that yet. I'll come to that during the questions, but I want to hear about that because I've only been able to do a half marathon. So we're not letting you get away with that one. We want to hear about it. So obviously that's quite a journey so far to get to that point. What barriers, if any, have you encountered and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, I guess like it's funny kind of trying to think of like seminal events, but I would say the biggest barrier, I mean, race would be an obvious one, but probably the autism thing, because I have hidden it really, really well. In that like and I don't, you know, my brain works very slowly. And so when people, so you know, I was trying to explain to someone a couple of months ago when they asked me a question kind of similar to this, and I said to them, I would say about 80% of the time, I don't understand what it is people are asking me to do. That's a big percentage of the time. Like, so when people say to me, like, you know, it's like, Nikki, Lauren, do you understand what you need to do? Like 80% of the time I'm lying. Like I don't. Like I'm literally trying to figure out as I go along. So I guess the secret's out of the bag now. But like I don't understand. But when you work with people, particularly in higher education, there is you know, people want things done at breakneck speed. So if I turn around and say 80% of the time I don't understand what's going on, I won't be working, you know. So like you kind of fake it until you make it in some regards. And maybe some people are honest enough to admit that, and some people aren't, but I'm honest enough to admit that. And I mean, the two biggest things that were the biggest kind of barriers was when I was 3 weeks before my Viva, which was 6 years ago last Wednesday, 4 weeks, I had a brain tumor removed. It was quite serious, and I had a stroke just after that, so a week after. So this was like 3 weeks before my Viva, and at that point I'd had my second child. I was on a temporary contract, and if I didn't get my PhD, I would have failed. I wouldn't have kept that job. And to this day, I don't know how I managed to do it, because I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't remember anything in my Viva. And for about it was like 2.5 hours of torture. You know, for like the first hour and a half, it was going terrible. And I remember thinking, okay, you come all this way, Jason, and you quit and you give up on yourself because of fear. You give up yourself. I don't mind you losing because you've been in the arena and you've been beaten by a better person, but you're going to lose to fear, right? And something happened, and it just all clicked. And then probably the bigger barrier that came after that was 2 years later, I got another brain tumor at 32, so 4 years ago. And that one was tough, because that one was cancerous, and yeah, that was really tough, because you know, I'd as optimistic as I am, even the neurologist said, you know, you don't drink, you don't smoke, you got a resting heart rate of like 32. I can only just say you've just been dealt a bad hand, and that was tough. But personally speaking, I learn more about myself when things don't go so well than when things do go well. And it always goes back to kind of the serenity prayer, which the abridged version is: when things don't go your way, take it with good grace, and when things do go your way, take it with good grace. So I always felt when things didn't go my way, I was always a really good loser. I was a really good loser, like, because lots of things didn't go my way. So I was always very good at losing, which meant that when I eventually did start winning a little bit as I got older, probably in the last 5 or 6 years, I was always able to take it graciously, and win with class, or be tactful of others, and recognize that, you know, other people, there's a tact and a class that comes with winning that is actually quite absent in academia, full stop, and life actually, but academia specifically, because what academia celebrates is individualism and postulating and showing off, and I was never like that, and I'm really proud of the fact that I never became like that as well.
And I know we've talked about like the people around you that kind of ground you, and before you kind of said, your friends and your family.
Yeah, they just wouldn't allow it. Apart from anything else, they just
love that.
they just knocked me down anyway, and they wouldn't allow it. Like, you know, the irony of doing this for a living is, to all my friends and family, they like, how can anyone listen to this clown? This guy is the most silliest person on the planet. This guy's favorite hobby in the world is watching Home and Away and Neighbours. Like,
Yeah, I do know that. Yeah.
this is not a man to be taken seriously. So like, you know, and you know, this is the kind of guy that breaks wind and finds it hilarious. Like, he's not, you know, at 36 years old, he hasn't he hasn't grown up. So I don't understand how people take him so seriously. And that's good. And I kind of don't want that to change. You know, I don't want to, you know, I think people sometimes feel like they need to change to fit in or to be taken more seriously. And I just never ever felt the need to do that, because I don't, apart from anything else, I don't know how else to be. And being myself, I think I did okay. But I think you only know that when you start doing okay, because, you know, people start telling you how you want to be. You acquire a lot of hangers on who never really believed in you in the first place, but give you a time of day when you start doing well. And if you surround yourself with those kinds of people, they're not honest people. They tell you what you want to hear. You know, there's a lot of academics you meet, and you know, they'll tell you how great they are, because they've got 20 people around them every day who tell them how great they are, and that's just not reality. It's not reality. Apart from anything else, everybody's great in their own way. Nobody's better than anyone else. And having you know, a couple of letters behind one's name doesn't make them any better than anyone else. If anything, it might be a sign of a misspent youth. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like, because if you know, the amount of time I spent studying, you know, I'd rather have had more fun. You know, there are things that are more important in life that I think I didn't always get the balance right. And, you know, and those are things that I regret, you know, so it's not all it's cracked up to be. You know, sometimes people can paint it out to be something it isn't. You know, I think balance is very, very important. And when you've got good people around you, you can maintain that.
Yeah. I was going to ask that. That's just before I move on to the next one, is how do you balance? Because you must be incredibly busy with your work. How do you balance that? Or don't you manage to? Is it?
No, I mean, I don't, and that's the thing, that, you know, there's no one I would ever, you know, I've got a 15-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I don't want them to be anything like me. Do you know what I mean? Like, Debs is like amazing. She's level-headed, she's balanced, you know, she has an unbelievable life. And if I wanted them to take after anyone, it'd be Debs. I wouldn't want them to take after me whatsoever, because like, I'm quite an obsessive person and obsessively driven. But a lot of that is not really to do with myself. It's to do with wanting to make the lives of people around me better. So my family, my friends, my parents, I've always been driven that, you know, my whole thing is, if I get bread, we'll all eat. You know, and I've always I've had this overwhelming desire to want to help people, and sometimes it clouds my judgment in terms of, you know, fiction and reality, in terms of, you know, there's Jason the dad at home, who's there, but he's not present. He's thinking of like things that he needs to be doing. So if my 15-year-old was sat here and you asked her, what's Jason like at home?
Yeah.
You know, she once described me as, Jason is never, he's present. He may be there physically in front of you, but he's always thinking. He's not there, if that makes sense. But then on the other hand, she said like, he's a very ordinary person capable of extraordinary things.
Yeah.
So like, so, and the most important part of that is that she said I'm an ordinary person, and that's really important, being ordinary. And there's something special in the ordinary, I think. But you know, that's what I mean in terms of balance. So you know, my fit, you know, where I had Taylor really young, you know, I'm still kind of learning to be a better parent. And you know, Noah's probably got the better end of it as me as a parent, whereas Taylor's experience would be completely different. But then on the other hand, you know, thank God she's got a really good life, and so does her brother, and they may not have that if I hadn't been the way I was. So balance is very, very important, and I don't ever look at myself and tell anyone to aspire to be like me, because being balanced is the way to be, and I'm not balanced, like, you know, and I wouldn't advise anyone to be like me.
Thank you. Well, that in terms of that kind of leads on, I keep saying leads on, but it does, we keep going into the next question kind of quite naturally, just in terms of like future ambitions and hopes. Like, obviously it's been quite a journey to here. What are your next steps in kind of any way, you know, personal, career, any of that?
Yeah, I guess I mean, to be honest, professionally, I have overachieved. I've done more than I ever thought I would, and I don't particularly have any more goals. I've honestly achieved everything I wanted to professionally. The one thing that means more to me than anything is, you know, in 3, 4, 5 years' time, it'd be amazing to see more Black and ethnic minority academics and professional staff in the academy, and for us to really nurture that generation of talent coming through to ensure that they realise their potential. Because I think there are a lot of people who've been failed by a systemically unjust and racist system, and so all my endeavours would probably be pushed towards that. I don't want to work in academia forever. I always said I'd call it a day when my daughter's 18, and that would be in 3 years' time, and I'd be 39. So it'd be cool to try and do something else, and help people in another way. And my dream really is to is the dream I had as a 21-year-old, is to travel the world doing relief work. Which is what I did when I was 20, before I had Taylor. But is what I'd like. I think that was my calling. I think that's what I was put on this planet to do, and that's really what I'd love to do. And to kind of set up my to grow my homeless kind of intervention, where we provide kind of so I've got kind of this team of like friends who do lots of different things, so like from hairdressing to, you know,
brilliant
clothes, chefs and stuff, and we kind of do this roadshow where we go around north, east, south, west London. We try and clothe and feed as many homeless people as possible, and try and find them access to shelters, local homeless shelters. So we buy beds and spaces. So for example, it's normally somewhere in the region of like £30 a night, and we'll pay for, you know, up to like 20 places, as many beds as we can buy, basically. And we make donations, and I obviously make donations and whatever, and my friends do, and we kind of try and do this, and it's we've done it for like the last 5 years, and it's been great. And
brilliant.
And just to really try and keep helping as many people as possible, and then also watch the kids, as in my own kids, grow up to be good citizens and stuff, and be good people, and just continue to try and make a difference, really. Like and most importantly, always be one of the people. Like I hope I never change, and that's the most important thing. Like I think the thing that's always worked to my advantage is that, like, I'm quite a simple person, and I think because of that, people probably think I'm quite relatable. Because I've never met a person who was able to guess what I did for a living, and believe me, academics like you to know what they do for a living. So I think it's a compliment that no one, you know, I always just say to you, I work in education, and they never could guess what I do. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, brilliant. Wow. And as my last question, I suppose, do you have any kind of like final thoughts or reflections to summarize in terms of like your own journey and things you've learned? Any kind of key thoughts?
Yeah, I mean,
obviously what you said was one.
I'd hope that if ever that like anyone knew me for anything, it'd be that there's more than one way to do things. You don't have to be an A-star student. You don't have to be the best. You know, I think typically most academics are academically very strong, and I wasn't. I left school with no qualifications. But I tell you what I did have. I wanted it more than anyone. You know, and I was willing to suffer, and I took just about every disappointment you can imagine along the way, and so to be in this position now, I mean, it was only 7 years ago that I had a weekend job at Sainsbury's, and I was working for a cleaning company on a Sunday, so cleaning toilets. Like that was 7 years ago. It wasn't that long ago.
No.
It was a year before I got my PhD. So, and that was just to make ends meet, and I had a full-time job, but like financially things were so difficult. And you know, I guess the thing I would say is that, you know, if you remain humble and you always try your best and you always do things with a good heart, then I think anything's possible. And for me, I think I never changed. I never became big time. I always remembered people who'd gone out their way to help me, and I was always obsessed with trying to be a good person. And not, I saw what academia was like, and a lot of my friends were like, "You won't last in the thing because you're not like that. You won't last like that." But I was like, "No, I will last if I stay true to myself." And I don't think I ever changed, and I'm really, really proud of that, because I think that's something to celebrate when you bear in mind what academia is like. It's vain, it's individualistic, it's egotistical, and I don't think I exhibit any of those traits, and I'm really proud I don't. And it's because I've always had good people around me, and amazing. The people who do amazing work is people like yourself, Lauren. People like Nikki. People like Chris in the background. People who make these things happen. Robbie, Emlyn. Like, people who make that difference is a praxis thing. It's not just about the theory of something. It's about actually how you implement it in the real world, and the doing. And if I look up to anybody, I look up to people like yourselves, and that for me is what it's all about. And if I can kind of be in a position where I'm fortunate enough to kind of, wrap your bootlaces, then I've done all right in life. So that's where I take my inspiration from, not people who are completely disconnected with the real world.
No, that's great. Thank you. Wow, that's I love the bit about kind of the 7 years ago as well, and the journey, and not having to take that, any route getting you to the same place, the place that you are. Everyone has their own route, don't they, and their own journey. So yeah.
I just don't. I think there's this whole idea that you have to, you have to do it this way, and you got to, and that's fine, but not everybody has access to that, and sometimes it just comes down to classic, how badly do you want it? And when it came to it, I think I wanted it more than most people. But there's also a personal cost, and that's why I'm saying, like, it's very important for people to have balance in life. You gotta balance these things, because it's not everything. All the things professionally that I thought would bring me absolute happiness, ironically, they didn't.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
So it's never as straightforward as that. So it's important to have balance and to have good people around you so that you can maintain that balance.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great. Thank you. Well, that's the end of me asking my questions. So I'm going to move on to some of the questions that we've had from the people watching, and also we had some pre-submitted questions as well. So I'm going to go to the first one in the chat here. Oh no, I'll go to this one here. So what was your biggest challenge as a Black man coming up, and how in academia, and how did you overcome this or these?
That's a great question. So my biggest challenge was the consistent lack of belief that white academics had in my ability.
Okay.
That was the biggest challenge. So when I would relay my ambitions to Black people and people of color, they didn't find it funny. They thought it was something that was attainable. But it was important. I knew the landscape and how difficult it was to achieve those particular things, particularly my desire to be a professor very young. But when I mentioned it to white people, and I did it, I guess, through the gaze of naivety, because they asked me, so I tell them that, it was like I said it's like I tickled their belly. It's like I said the most hilarious thing to them. They just thought it was so unattainable, and it was such a ridiculous thing to even think. But I wasn't going to be thrown off the scent, and that's what I mean. Like, self-belief, when channeled in the right way, is such an important thing. And I always feel like people don't wear self-belief on their sleeve. It's something within. When you wear self-belief on your sleeve, I think that can be quite arrogant, and that's kind of not really what I'm about. But I think when it's something within, and it's so hard to explain, but I just knew I was like a ball of steel. I just knew I couldn't be broken, and I knew that I would achieve that goal no matter what, because I was willing to suffer. I was willing to do whatever it took to do it, because I knew that the pain of doing it would be temporary, but the achievement would benefit many, many people, and it would mean that my kids would have a great life, my friends would have a good life, because anything I have, I share with them, and it would mean that I could help a lot of people along the way. So you know, the only people it wasn't silly to or didn't seem stupid to was people of color. You know, they were kind of like, of course you can do it. Why not? You know.
And were they teachers? Were they like teachers, academic? Like who? Like obviously, I know you're not going to name them, but was it kind of
no.
all the way from like?
Funnily enough, like I'm from South London, but I was never taught by a person. My whole schooling, I was never taught until I finished my PhD. I was never taught by a person of color, not one. So it was people outside of academia, so people in the community, people in my opinion who make a real difference. You know, so and yeah, and they the way they would talk to me, and Sandro was instrumental. You know, Sandro was. He was huge, and Debs was huge as well. Like Debs was huge as well, but like Sandro in particular, he would tell me, he would text me every day. I mean, he only recently stopped doing it, but you know, he'd text me every day for 15 years and was like, "You're a winner. You're going to win. You're going to." And you know, if someone says that to you every single day for 15 years, like, you know, sometimes he wouldn't say anything. He wouldn't ask me how my day was. He'd just be like, "Winner, full stop."
Yeah.
And you read that every day, and you know, if we was to look through my WhatsApp messages from Sandro, or if I typed in "winner" in the search, it'd just be Sandro.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that was like a huge thing. And I think if you want to do well and you're quite single-minded in that, I think one thing you've got to try not to do is listen too much to negativity. I think you've just got to go for it. You've just go for it and see what happens. And yeah, I'm one of those people that I would rather lose going for it than be risk averse and not do that. And yeah, it has its downsides, but I would take all the downsides, because for the 9 times you'll lose, the 1 time you win, it's a lot sweeter, and it means you appreciate it more because you know how to lose, and that's really, really important. Learning to lose with grace.
Where the lessons are. Yeah. Great. So the next question from the audience is, do you think that there has been enough done to dismantle inequalities in education relating to ethnicity and social class?
No, not even close. Yeah. So I think sadly there are a lot of people that don't want things to change, which is a real shame. There's a resistance to that kind of change. And you know, if you think about kind of the education secretary that's just gone, Gavin Williamson, and you know, I was in a situation where I had talks with him around the black curriculum, you know, in terms of Black history curriculum, and I can't tell you how reluctant he was to engage in that, and you know, how many of his kind of contemporaries didn't really see the purpose in doing that. And that's the person who makes the decision, who made the decisions for what happens in our education system. So if at that level you can't really change it, and that's the level, to be honest with you, that really matters in terms of how it impacts policy, then it makes it very difficult to kind of, you know, infiltrate and disrupt those types of inequalities. And I think what we're going to see is a bigger chasm between the haves and the have-nots, and the people that are intersectionally disadvantaged by what is a very inequitable system. But I think as long as you've got people, you know, who hold government to account, as long as you have people who are at the cold face, you know, trying to disrupt all of these things, I think you've got a chance, you know. And the thing with inequality is you've got to be able to, as I said yesterday, when we were doing disrupting racism, you've got to be able to tap it on the shoulder. If you get the march on you, it's very difficult. And I still think we're in touch distance of it, you know. And I think as long as you have people who have that intrinsic motivation to disrupt social injustice, you've always got a chance. And I know, you know, however long my life, be it short or long, like that, you know, I won't stop until I'll do the most I can, and then you pass it on to someone else who's got more energy to take on the baton. And you know, a freshness of energy always challenges these different guises and myriads of kind of inequality.
Thank you. What advice, and this leads on, what advice would you give to students who feel like they do not fit in at university because of their race?
That's a great question. That don't fit in. I think it's about making your own space.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's about making your own space. Like, and the reason I say that is because within these kind of white structures, these ivory structures, they're not designed for us to feel a sense of belonging. So there's a really good quote. I can't remember who said it. It might have been Sindavan. Like, power is rarely given; it's taken.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take that space. One, because you're worthy of it. Two, because nobody should have a monopoly on that space. And three, because you're entitled to it.
Yeah.
So it's about creating a sense of belonging by taking space. Now, how can you practically do that? The most obvious answer would be ACS, ACS societies. But actually, it's about how you curate space and recognizing the power in your own agency to be able to do that. And that shouldn't be underestimated. And I think that's really important. And everywhere that I've gone, when I was a student and as someone that's a member of staff now, I've always tried to kind of like, I don't stamp authority. I'm not very authoritative, but I've always tried to kind of be like, right, how do I make my mark here? How do I make my mark? Because you're entitled to that space, and yeah, I've come up against people who say things to me like, you only got this job because you're black, or these kind of things. And, and I'll say that might well be the case, but I'll show you just how good I am. And it's not even that I show that person, it's more like I've got the space so I can show how good I am. Not really, I don't waste my energy showing a person, but no. I've got the space now, so you show people. So it's about reclaiming space. It's, that's what it's about. It's about claiming space to be yours, not asking whether you should have that space, and looking for a sense of belonging in asking. You should be taking space, because that's how it should be. And I think that people rarely give space to people. You have to take it.
Yeah Great. How do you wear so many hats or roles, Jason?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I never thought of it like that. I always just wanted to do the best I could to help people. So you try and do as much as you can. And yeah, if I had to work out, I know for a fact I probably haven't really slept in like 12 years.
Wow.
So and I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because I'm feeling it. I feel it now. But I think the most important thing is that, like, there's like a weight and a responsibility that comes with being in certain positions, because fundamentally, as my dad always says, whatever you do in life, people are always watching you.
Yeah.
It's how you use that responsibility. And for me, I was always, I always had this idea of, okay, how can I affect change with the responsibility I have? And like, yeah, I guess it's kind of like, heavy is the head that wears the crown. I don't think I can do it forever, because there's a lot of pressure. You have to be perfect. I don't think people understand just how difficult it is to be a person of color, particularly black, in the academy. Just how perfect you have to be all the time is exhausting. The thing that tires me out is not doing work. The thing, sometimes I can spend up to 2 hours sending a 50-word email just because I know I can't put a foot wrong. And then I see my white colleagues who live a completely different existence to myself. So that's the thing that is, I always think, I guess in that way, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. I never thought of it before. I just kind of thought I wanted to do the best I could to help as many. I don't want anybody to suffer the way I've suffered in the academy, and it doesn't need to be as hard as it's been for me. Yeah, like sometimes people think that there's these rites of passage. There are so many gifted Black and ethnic minority people out there, and there are so many easy routes to get into academia. And what I'm trying to do is to expose all of those routes. Yeah. So that people don't struggle in the way that I have, because there's no need for somebody to be £60,000 in debt, which I've only recently just paid off. Paying for qualifications when there's studentships all over the place. I didn't find out that you could get a PhD studentship until 2 days after I got my PhD. Wow. That would have made such a difference in my life had I known you could be paid to do a PhD, right? So I think it's about kind of, you wear these hats because it allows you to be kind of super agile and have strings to your bow. And so when people are talking nonsense, you know, you can respond, and it works to my advantage because everybody underestimates me, and they always say I'm very unassuming. So they always underestimate what I am or what I do, which is great. You know, I don't take it as a slight. It's fantastic, because then when people talk nonsense, I can say, well, with this hat on, as a deputy executive dean, actually, what you're saying is incorrect, and I know it to be factually incorrect because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Whereas because I guess to look at me, I just don't think people would be like, he doesn't look like a deputy executive dean. But like, you know, in my faculty, in terms of seniority, I'm the dean is the most senior person. I'm like one of the most senior people in my faculty, even close to or above a head of department. So like it's funny kind of how people interpret things, but having those different strings allows you to help as many people as possible if your intentions are pure and you're not about just power.
Yeah. Well, talking about hats, your marathon hat, I wanted to get to this one as well. Running 30 marathons, did you say in 35 days?
Yeah.
What challenges did you face during that? Somebody wants to know.
Yeah, that was a funny one. That wasn't the worst. That wasn't the worst. Like there were 2 other events after that. There was 300 miles in 3 days, which was like 21 hours of running on a treadmill a day, which was horrible. And then there was Edinburgh to London in 6 days, which was 600 miles in 6 days. And that was horrible. That was horrible. So the biggest challenge I faced in the 30 and 35 was that I'm epileptic. So I had a seizure, and on marathon 20, I ended up with when I had the seizure, I fell on the floor really badly, and I ended up with a hairline fracture in my leg, in my fibula. But by that point, we had raised so much money. We'd raised nearly £250,000 by that point. I couldn't, like, I had so many people banking on me, and the 2 charities we were raising money for, Shelter and Shooting Stars Chase, all I kept thinking was like, this is going to make so much difference to, you know, young children who are in this horrible kind of inevitability phase of their life, and you want it to be as good as possible. And that's all I was thinking about. And so, yeah, that was the biggest challenge, because, you know, I still had 10 marathons to do, and it was horrendous. But I remember we finished at the Statue of Eros in Piccadilly Circus, and one of the best sights I ever had in my life. There was probably about maybe 20,000 people.
Wow.
All with these kind of t-shirts on that had been given to them saying, I'm running with Jason. And it was insane coming around the corner, like running up kind of Regent Street, and just seeing all of these people like that were just there to kind of you know, support this cause. And it was insane. That was probably one of the best memories of my life. And then obviously when we got to again, we finished the final one, Edinburgh to London, so I finished all of these when I was 30, and that was a very significant one, because my lifelong goal was to raise £1 million for charity, and that particular event took us over the 1 million mark. And that year we finished, and I also I was awarded an MBE, which I turned down.
I didn't. Yeah. I was going to
Because of
say,
the
I
work
didn't know
I do.
that. Yeah.
So that was a really surreal experience. My parents were gutted, but you know, I explained to my mum that, like, and she understood that because of the work I do, I just could never take that kind of award. And also I never did it for that reason. And you know, there was a lot of people that helped, and if there's a way that they could collectively be acknowledged, then that's great. But actually, because of that and because of the work I do, I could never have accepted that. And and I guess 5 years later, like the target we're at, well, not the target, the amount we've raised now is just over 5 million for charity.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow. Yeah, just another hat there. That's incredible. Very impressive. So I've got two more questions. I think these will probably be the last two because we've only got 10 minutes left. So how to stay resilient when facing the constant pressures of academia? So things like funding, short-term contracts and lack of work-life balance. So that's quite a good one as well.
How to stay resilient? Yeah, I think that's a tough one. I think it's very difficult. I would never. I think, I've just, funnily enough, I just finished a paper on precarious contracts and how it affects Black and ethnic minority people in academia. And I do a lot of work around mental health, and I would never want to comment on someone's threshold of what type of resilience they should have or shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But the thing that I would always say is that as a person from a Black or ethnic minority background or white working class background, I think to varying degrees, particularly if you're a Black and ethnic minority, I think you're going to have to suffer. I think that's inevitable. And I was talking about this to someone a couple of days ago, but it's a really good point. Tyson Fury was telling a story, and he was saying that when he got knocked down by Deontay Wilder in their first fight, he said that he'd visualized over and over again that he was going to be knocked down by Deontay Wilder because it was going to be impossible for him to go 12 rounds and not get hit by the biggest heavyweight puncher of all time. And he got knocked down. And he said when he actually got knocked down, he had dreamt that he would get knocked down and he'd get back up. And he'd been expecting it. So it wasn't a surprise to him when it came. And I think part of being in academia is knowing that it's going to be difficult. I think sometimes the element of surprise is what throws people. Once they're in it, they think, shit, I didn't realize it was this difficult. And I think if you know something's going to be difficult, it's not that you can prepare yourself for it, but then there are no surprises. And so, but the reason why I use that Tyson Fury example is because he knew that he could potentially be knocked concussively out. He knew he was going to suffer at some stage in that fight, and he did. He suffered twice and got back up twice. And I think with academia, you have to accept you're going to suffer. But I think the best lessons you'll learn is from that suffering. And I think that suffering builds resilience. And I really believe that. I think the more you can come through that suffering, the more resilience it will build. Now, it's not a hard science, but it's my personal belief. And I think all the disappointments I had made me more determined. But it's also important to acknowledge that I am fairly benefit from being a man, and I'm unfairly advantaged over women of color, particularly Black women. So it's all well and good for me to sit here and say that, but at the end of the day, like I'm not a Black woman. I don't have to face what Black women face, because Black women are excellent. They are brilliant. They're beyond brilliant. I'm somewhere in the middle, but the difference is that I could probably get to the top, whatever the top may be, and a Black woman can be as brilliant and as excellent as they always are, and they may not get to the top, purely based on the variable of race and then intersectionally gender. So, and then all the other intersections that come with that as well. So, like I said, sometimes it's important to caveat these things, because me sitting here blowing hot air is one thing, but the actual reality of things is that not everybody has access to be able to tap into that type of resilience, because not everyone's given the same opportunities, and that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, definitely. And then the final question that we've got from the audience is, are you or have you been a person of faith? And if so, does that play any part in your outlook on life?
Yeah, do you know what is really funny? I I get asked that question so often. Like, I don't know if it's really obvious.
Okay.
But yeah, I am and I think it's fair to say I have a tempestuous relationship with God. But what I would say is that anytime there's a prayer that my mum always says to me about the footprints prayer, and it's this idea of when you thought you was on your own, I was always with you. And there are just so many things that have happened personally in my life that there is no explicable reason how I could have come out the other end of that, other than the fact that there is someone looking over my shoulder, and that my fate is always laid in the lap of the gods. And I think if not for that, I don't think I would have been able to do the things I've done. And I say that because, you know, obviously there's only so much you can say in an hour, but, you know, there's a lot of things that have happened. You know, I had a road accident when I was 16 and I was in a coma for like
Wow,
5 months. Like, it's been like the most crazy life. And just, you know, I had to learn to walk and talk and do all these things again. And it's just, there's no way any of these things are not my doing. I just feel like there's a higher person who's just kind of pulling all these strings and making me do things that I'm really actually not capable of. And I've been blessed in a way that it's quite hard to comprehend. Like in terms of the people I've met, you know, the life that I've been fortunate to have, the friends that I've met, and being able to affect people positively, like yeah, having healthy children, like, you know, my parents have lived to see things happen that I didn't think they might do. Yeah, I mean, how the hell can that just be, you know, just that life? There's got to be someone controlling all of that. And so my faith is like a moral compass. It helps me stay grounded in terms of like trying to be a good person and doing the right things, and trying to be humble and remembering that this is not everything. And when I say this is not everything, I'm not talking about like beyond life. I'm saying this is not everything, as in academia is not everything. For most people, it makes absolutely no difference in their lives. What makes a difference is it's like kind of Maya Angelou said, it's not what you said to people, it's not kind of, she said it's not what you say to people, it's about how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And for me, like, that's the one thing that I would always hope that people was like, do you know what, like, you know, he was a silly guy, but he you know, he always tried, he was one of the people. And that's the expression that me and my friends use. You always want to be one of the people. And one of the people means you're not above anyone and you're not below anyone, but you're all the same.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, on that note, is there anything else you want to say? I mean, that was a pretty great note to end on, really.
Just to thank you, Lauren, you know, and Nikki. I just think that both of you are brilliant. Like, and you know, just it's not lost on me that it's 6:30 and 36 people taking the time to be here, and I'm really grateful. And I think the most important thing is you can do anything. Right? There is no such thing as can't, or you can't not do. I don't accept that. I don't tell my kids that, because I think it's important for them to, you know, find life out for themselves. But, you know, like, you can do anything. You can do anything. Like, you know, this crazy Brazilian Italian and this crazy kid from a council estate in South London, we took on the world together and we won. So if I can do that with like not a lot, you know, then you know, most people I know are so gifted and so intelligent, and you can do anything. You can do anything, you know. So I really hope, if nothing else, people take from this that, you know, you can do anything, and that's really important.
Yeah, that's a brilliant message to finish on. So thank you. And thanks. Yeah, thank you for being here at 6:30 on a Thursday evening. It is, isn't it? I've lost track this week. Yeah, brilliant to hear from you. And it's been great to hear so much of your story, because obviously we've worked together, but a lot of that I didn't know. And probably many people who've listened, who've been to sort of training and things you run, didn't know, you know, all of those bits of your story. So it's really inspiring, as somebody's actually put in the chat. So thank you very much. What a story. What a story so far. And let's see where it continues to go.
Yeah, no, hopefully, like, but like I said, I'm just so fortunate to have met you, Lauren. I think you're amazing, and Tracy, and you know how much I love you both. Like, we've had such a laugh over the last 3 years, and yeah, I just feel really fortunate, you know.
Yeah,
really.
no, it's been brilliant to work with you, Jason, and yeah, thank you for being here tonight and sharing it all.
No worries, and thanks again, Nikki, as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. And yeah, thank you very much, Jason. Thanks for everyone who helped organise it. Rob, you, Emmeline, Nick, Nikki, thank you. Good night.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.